and really my thinking evolved in terms of practice from, hey, let's progress, let's get faster, let's get stronger, let's get more powerful, let's get more technically sound, into I want practice each day, Monday through Saturday, to be a definitive positive experience for them.
Welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. Today, I'm joined by the Bob Thurnhoffer, head track and field cross-country coach at Loyola, University of Chicago, who has been the head coach for 5 years at Loyola, for 11, a D1 coach for 17, having previous stops at University of Illinois at Chicago as well. He's spoken at multiple Glacier clinics and written for Simply Faster and 1080 as well. So someone who has been all around the track and field space, who does jumps, middle distance sprints, everything in between, literally does it all. Someone who I was connected with through 1080, which we will make that video soon. But I've enjoyed our few brief phone calls, and you really sparked my interest with some of the brief chats that we've had. I'm super excited to get into it. So first, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful, Matt, on this kind of cool Chicago morning. How about yourself? How you doing?
Oh, I'm fantastic. I'm ready to get after it. On fire, if you will.
Let's go.
So the first kind of question is not on script or one of the regular questions. This is stemming from one of our phone calls that we had, and something that really got my brain going was you speaking about just coaching in quarantine and the team kind of coming back and how practices have changed. And you made a comment that you just learned to be more conscious or willing to change practice and just giving the athletes what they need that day with all of the things going on. And sometimes that would result in you guys just sitting and chatting for 2 hours at a time instead of actually practicing. And I'm sure all the coaches in us are like, oh my gosh, like, well, what if you don't, what if you don't practice? So if you could just kind of chat on that topic, and we'll kind of just go from there for a little bit.
Yeah, I think as a coach, I love the sports science side of things. We talked about that a lot, and I think a lot of coaches are the same, especially in the world of speed training and speed power training, track and field, football, etc. I know the X's and O's are that's such a hot topic, and it's certainly what I obsess over and read about and study and think about, and generally how my brain works is how to program training, what adjustments to make, and doing kind of working the nitty gritty details of 1080 sprint uses, the lifts, how the lifts are pairing with speed training, and the technical model we're developing month to month, year to year, and all that. But this year, and I think my brain tends to like focus maybe almost too much on that at times. But on the other side of that, I love connecting with the athletes, and that's one of the absolute greatest things about coaching. It's really the greatest thing about coaching for sure. But when we came back after, when we came back in August, September, and started up, I kind of like started as if things were normal, like a normal year. We're going through acceleration, we're working on max velocity mechanics, we're going through some rudimentary multi-jump med ball throws, getting into the lifting program, and I'm kind of like diving in as if we're starting as normal in September. But maybe like 2 or 3 weeks in, I started, the more you talk to the athletes, the more you kind of get a sense of where they're at, the more I started to realize, wow, like this year, I mean, obviously it's very different than other years. There's no question about that. But I think I needed to kind of like hit T for a second and be like, wait, like this is not only different, this is extremely different from other years. And, the more I talked to the athletes, the more I reconnected with them face to face. We did lots of Zooms over the pandemic from March till August or whatever, but it's just different when you're in person and you're with a group together, and you just kind of talk to them, you ask them how that last 6 months or whatever it was went while they're during the pandemic, while they're in quarantine, how their family is doing, how the health of their family members is doing. Like, I actually lost my grandmother to COVID, so I could really relate to a lot of them on that front. Um, And so you talk to him about that, and then, the other thing is you think about, like, just the world we're in, and, the economy's not doing well, and then they're also thinking about, like, what are my job prospects gonna be a year, 2, 3 years from now, just given the way the world is, and, all the obviously a really hot topic was, systemic racism, that is and rightfully so, and so that was a huge topic that we discussed during the pandemic and at practice quite often. And so, the more I talk to him, the more you start to, you know, I really try. I say, let me get sidetracked here for a second, and I really try as hard as I can. I fail more often than I succeed to put myself in the shoes of others and try to understand where they're coming from. And so I started to think about like if I was 18, 19, 20, 21 years old in these circumstances, what would be going through my head? And then like when I really started to think about that, I started to, it kind of was like, oh my God, like this is really serious. I can't imagine, having thoughts and fears and thing and anxiety over the state of the world while finishing college, if you will, and so yeah, I guess the point being is, I think my perspective on coaching and practice every day kind of shifted from the traditional like, oh, let's progress training, let's improve our acceleration, max velocity, let's get faster, let's master the long jump, high jump, triple jump, etc. And I didn't lose that. Don't get me wrong, but it became a lot less about like pushing the envelope in training, and it became more about let's hit on the fundamentals, hit on them well, and let's just like let's talk. Let's just let's talk about some hard things, like pour your guts out. Let's sit outside and and talk about life for an hour. There's one discussion where I was working with one of our jumpers in October, and I could tell she was just it wasn't clicking that day, and I was like, hey, how about we just call it a day? Why don't you have a seat here? And I sat on the 1080 sprint because we were doing a 1080 sprint session. I was like, I'm gonna hit the off switch on the tablet. I'm gonna flip the switch on the machine. I sat on the machine. She sat on right next to me, and we talked about like everything under the sun for probably 2 hours. And that was, yeah, we didn't get necessarily better in terms of speed training or whatnot, but I think it was the appropriate thing to do given those circumstances. And that really became, I'd say, more or less like the theme of the fall is just, yeah, we want to train, we want to progress. I think it's healthy for the athletes to feel like they're training, progressing towards a goal of some sort, whether that be a personal best or making a conference final or a regional national qualification. But I think this year more than any other year by far, I felt like we really had to balance it with just taking care of the well-being of the athletes. I mean, I really deeply care about these kids, and just to see them going through what they're going through is, it really affected me, and I just wanted to do anything I could to help them. And really my thinking evolved in terms of practice from, hey, let's progress, let's get faster, let's get stronger, let's get more powerful, let's get more technically sound, into I want practice each day, Monday through Saturday, to be a definitive positive experience for them. And if that meant all we did was just, warm up and throw some med ball and that was it, it was nothing like all that revolutionary, or we just, hit a couple 20-meter sprints and that was it for the day. I was just okay with that. And, I just wanted to make sure that hour and a half, 2 hour, 1 hour, 45 minute, whatever it was, that was undoubtedly, despite all the negativity in the world, that kind of morsel, that little time frame within a day, each day, that was undoubtedly going to be a positive experience to kind of nudge the needle in the right direction, so they could be uplifted or emotionally more positive, or they could have more positive feelings in that sense. So I think obviously you always balance that sort of like the exercise science piece as a coach with just the connection and the personal well-being of the athletes. And I think it's important to do both. I don't want to downplay, training and programming and methods like that. I mean, that's what I've really built my career off of. But, certainly that was not what's important this year. I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, and in the grand scheme of things, that's not what's important. It's about, those more meaningful things with human connection and whatnot. So it really was, obviously both those things are always at play, but this year it was just like completely on that side of things. And it was really valuable. I thought we had some really great talks, some totally informal, just connecting with each other, a lot of tears, in a good way. I think it's easy for kids to feel like they got to bottle things up and hold in, but I think it's really important as a coach that you give them that safe space where they feel like they can say, the thoughts that they're having and pour those things out to you. So I think in that sense it was extremely valuable fall. Maybe I mean training was just kind of okay. Some things went really well, but I think it was more so about that piece more than anything else.
And that's one of the unique things about the college setting is you're the most consistent part of their week.
Mhm.
Like you think 6 hour and a half, 2 hour practices. Well, classes they have 2 or 3 times a week, an advisor they might meet with once a week. So it's
Yep.
such an awesome opportunity with this kind of guard down. They don't have to be this
Yeah.
professional student,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just being that consistency is so valuable. And the fact that you were able to step outside of yourself by thinking, what are they going through? Like what would 18-year-old Bob be feeling right now with all this stuff going on? And that went super far. And I can only imagine kind of like the athletes just wanting amidst all of this stuff, all the stuff that you mentioned that they were like, I cannot wait to go to practice today.
Yeah.
How that goes so much farther than dropping, a few hundredths on whatever time it may be in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things. And that's one of the themes thus far of this will be episode 104, I think, is that the X's and O's bring us together, but that's not really what it's about when it comes time to share the stories and stuff like that. But kind of one follow-up question on this topic, and then we'll get into the main questions is
Sure.
that first practice where you kind of just put the practice plan aside and kind of just let it be in the moment where you kind of like am I going to let this happen, but we have to do this? Or was it when you got home later that day you were like, wait, we didn't practice? So kind of the first moment when you let go of that
Yeah.
control, because that's something that I have to work on myself.
Sure.
that
Yeah.
first that
No
first
doubt.
moment where you realized that you let go of it, kind of what was your first reaction to that?
I would say it was like a steady build. And so, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself to that, maybe that last question you're going to ask. And so, one thing I do as a coach, and I've done this for probably a decade now, is I write pretty extensive notes on after every single practice. And it's not just detailing it's for data collection, obviously, with 1080 and with Broward timing gates, or like measuring jumps, the volume we did, all those various X's and O's details. But I write a lot about like the soft skills and the mentality of the team, some of the things the kids said to me, some of the thoughts that I had, or things that, and probably mostly things I felt like I didn't do all that well and I need to do better at. It's probably what I spend most of the time doing. And on that note, I noticed like in my notes, because I after each day, kind of like because we started early September, we're kind of moving into mid-September. I started having these thoughts about like, man, something about this year, I feel like I'm not quite clicking here. Something's missing. I started to take more stock of what some of the athletes are saying, just about like, the state of the world and kind of where their mentality is at. And then I think it was more like a gradual shift kind of from late September into October, where I was like, you know what, man, I gotta like stop thinking about the nuances of training. Just, hit on acceleration, hit some standing long jumps, hit on some max velocity drills, just do some short approach long jumps. Those are the good things. You got to do it. That'll get the job done. Do some 1080 for sure. But at the end of the day, like, if I'm doing 280 meters of acceleration or 320 meters of acceleration. Who cares, man? Like that's not the point this year, and so I think it was like gradually dawned on me, and then it was really in October when it I took it to heart, and I would try to. I think that back then, I think one of the key things I would do is every Saturday practice, I've really made a point to because I'm not a big like football coach, like stand up and you know pump the team up. I'm a very mellow guy. I like the more individual, personal connection type thing. But every Saturday practice, like after the workout, I would call everyone together. We'd huddle up, and I'd kind of have like a couple key points to kind of get them, perk their spirits up, if you will. And I thought like that seemed to help. Like I know a lot of the guys would and girls, they would tell me, days later that some of the stuff that we discussed in that kind of circle really helped them, for a day, or just kind of steer them in the right direction, because they felt like they needed to hear that. And so I don't know if I really like. I think a lot of it, I was just like, I felt like I needed to help them in some way, as I was kind of throwing mud at the wall and hoping some things would stick. And I think it kind of did to some degree, but yeah, I don't think there was a definitive moment where I was like, wow, I got to make this shift. It was more like, you know, I through that note taking after practice each day, more that topic emerged more and more. And then I kind of was like, wow, I need to kind of turn my perspective quite a lot this year, and make sure I'm paying much more attention to that piece, and just make sure that practice is a clearly definitive positive experience for the student athletes, because there's you turn on CNN, and it's just chaos and destruction and all the political stuff going on. And then the pandemic was, yeah, I mean, the worst of the pandemic was probably actually in November. In Chicago, it was. There's no doubt about that. And so the pandemic was not getting better at this time, and so, it just, they're thinking about their futures and what the future will hold for them, and et cetera. And so, it was really, really important to make sure that I wanted it to be fun. Yeah, I wanted it to be purposeful and like feel like we're training towards something, but I wanted it to be a fun, positive experience. And so that was sort of like the slight shift that we took that year. And it was more gradual rather than a definitive moment.
Incredible. 17 years into coaching and still looking for ways to grow and change and kind of get that edge. And I love
Yeah.
how just my experience with the 1080 and your experience with the 1080
Yeah.
and you just said do some 1080 stuff, it'll get the job it'll get the job done.
Yeah.
So really cool story, and that definitely, even in our brief 30-minute talk, like I just
Yeah.
remember I've been thinking about that a lot actually, and learning to let go of control, and why are you really there, and what is the most valuable for the athlete that day. And that can be them as a person, or them, student athlete, is that them as a person, or whatever. So super cool story, but we will get into it. So the first fundamental story of your career, kind of like looking back, the first one, if you had to pick one that set
Sure.
you up kind of for everything else, well, the first story that kind of set up everything else, what would that be?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this question, and I think maybe some of the stories I would tell, I already told on Mike Cunningham's Gill Athletics podcast. And so I'm going to skip over a few of those, and I'm going to kind of focus on like my early experiences when I first started at Loyola, because I think those are really really fundamental, and I think they're very humbling, if you will, as well. And so I think when you say like what's like a really fundamental story that kind of set me up for where I am today, man, there's probably about 30 of those you could say, right? And it's amazing to like think back on your career, and think about all the things that had to happen to get you where you are today. And that's something I never lose sight of, because it's just really cool to think about and fun to think about. And so I'm going to turn my attention to like right when I started at Loyola. And so I right out of college, I coached at UIC, Illinois Chicago. I coached the jumps there for 4 years as basically a part-time coach. and I coached long and triple jump. I helped out with the high jump as well. I had some really good experiences there. I basically just coached walk-ons. We get 33, 34-foot girl triplers and, try to coach them up. We get 41-foot guy triplers and try to coach them up and, turn them into conference finalists or conference champions even. One girl actually set the conference record that held for 7 years. And so, I had a really good experience there. But sort of towards the end of that 4 years, I went through I guess I'd call it a millennial early life crisis, if you will.
The
Um,
quarter life crisis, something
the
I'm
quarter life crisis.
too
Yeah.
familiar with myself.
Yeah, yeah, you're probably like close to it at this point. But yeah, it was a matter of like, I don't know, what direction does my life want to go? Like, do I want to pursue coaching the rest of my career? Do I want to go, there's some other like things that are interesting or that I found very compelling and interesting that I was getting very heavily invested in at the time. And that was like theology and philosophy as well. And so I was really my attention was very kind of focused on obviously coaching and whatnot and training and speed power training, that sort of thing. But I was also like very deeply interested in theology and philosophy and those bigger questions in life, if you will. And I was studying a lot in that just kind of on my own. And so I stepped down from UIC towards like what, 08, 09, somewhere in there. And I actually was thinking I wanted to go more the academic route and possibly go into research and teaching in that kind of theology philosophy realm. And so I stepped down. I actually went to back to undergrad, or no, sorry. So I actually did go to seminary for a year, over a year. That's kind of how how serious I was about it. And it was a really good experience overall. But it towards the end of my time in the seminary, I kind of had some very, I guess you'd say, philosophical differences with the I had a systematic theology professor, and I wrote a paper and he didn't like it. And so I got a sort of like in a conflict with him, and it really pushed me kind of out of seminary, because I didn't agree with some of the things he was saying and some of the things that he wanted me to write, and I felt like just I couldn't continue with the program anymore, and so I shifted my focus into philosophy at that time, and uh, and so I didn't have any really like formal experience in academic philosophy, but it was just something I studied voraciously on my own. And so at that time I went back to undergrad. I took several philosophy courses, and then I started applying to grad programs in philosophy because I needed at least some experience that I could put on an application. And so, yeah, kind of that 08, 09, yeah, not quite 2010, I was applying to various grad programs in philosophy, and Loyola was one of them because they had the specialization I was looking for, which was in sort of like 19th, 20th century European philosophy. That was kind of where my focal point was. And so I applied there. I applied to a couple other places, and I needed a grad assistant position in order to pay for it. So, I was looking at that too, and that was kind of narrowing my search quite a lot. And lo and behold, Loyola did have a GA position available. And so I contacted the head coach, and he said, "Oh, there's I got about, I think it was like 4 or 5 other applicants that I have on my list. So you can be like the next guy after them." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if that's gonna work out. I mean, who wouldn't why would 4 people turn this thing down? I think it'd be a really good opportunity." But my friend, he was the volunteer throws coach at Loyola at the time, Pat McGarry, and I was very close friends with him, and he was really advocating for me to get that position with the head coach, the head coach is Rick Wimple at the time. And so he was kind of in Wimple's ear, like, "Hey, I think we need Bob." But Loyola didn't really have a jumps program. And so he was kind of like, well, what do we need Bob for if we don't really have, they only had really like two jumpers in the team, two women jumpers. And so anyways, I contacted Wimple back in June, I think maybe, and I filled out the application to the philosophy department, and then I just didn't like hear anything. And then Wimple had told me that I was kind of the last on a list of maybe four, five, six applicants. So I kind of like given up on it, and I wasn't really sure, what I was going to do at that point. I was working at Dick Pond Athletics 30 plus hours a week to just save up some money and pay the bills, if you will. And I was just trying to figure out the next step. And I did that through the summer, through the fall, and then it must have been December at some time, and I had mostly forgotten about it. I would check in every now and then with Wimple, and he would just kind of say the same thing, like, oh yeah, I got you on the list, whatever. But it was in December, Wimple calls me up and he's like, "Hey Bob, you remember me? This is Coach Rick Wimple at Loyola." I was like, "Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, what's going on? What's up with the GA position? Like, did you fill it? I'm still." And he was like, "Are you still interested? It's been a while." I was like, "Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'd certainly still be interested." He was like, "Yeah, well, everyone else turned it down, so you're kind of next man up." And so I was like, uh, I take no offense to that. It's an opportunity. So I wanted to. Yeah, it's all about what you do with an opportunity. Who cares if you're the least wanted applicant, right? And so at that time he told me to come in for an interview, which was maybe like a week later, and then I just had to finish up my application with the philosophy department at that time, because I hadn't totally finished it yet, because I was just waiting to hear back from Wimple. And so I circled back to that and finished the application. And then I went in. I remember I drove like 2 hours through this giant snowstorm up to campus, and I did the interview with Wimple, and then the athletic director was John Planick, who I believe is at Lewis University now, and did the interview with them. And yeah, it went really well. It felt like I meshed with them well. I met Tom Hitcho, who's the guy that was pushing Sister Jean around in the wheelchair during the Final Four run. Who and to this day, Hitch is still like a really big influence on me. I met Sister Jean on the interview because she was obviously an institution at Loyola. That was when Sister Jean would be shuffling around campus all the time. She didn't need a wheelchair, so different times back then. But yeah, it went really well. And then a few days later, Wimple offered me the position, and so I started maybe 2 weeks after that, and kind of like mid early January, somewhere in there. Loyola actually had a few meets already, and I started like right before the third meet. And so my second day on the job, this is mid January 2010, is I was driving a van to a meet at Illinois, at University of Illinois. Okay. And I was brought in to kind of be the jumps coach. There was really only three athletes I worked with, kind of four, but it's Natalie LaFleur. She was a triple jumper from California who her career wasn't quite panning out. And so I was supposed to like kind of bring her back to jumping 37, 38 feet. And then Candice Karajan was a walk on. She was long triple jump. She played volleyball at Loyola and ran track. And then we had this guy, Matt Wyzorek. And he was a mid distance runner. He's like, maybe, I don't know. He's probably going to hate me if I get this wrong. Cause I still talk to him, but maybe like a 202, 800 guy, something like that. He wasn't lighting the world on fire, but he's an awesome guy. And so Wimple was trying to squeeze out some points at the Horizon League Championships. And so he told Matt Wyzorek, this middle distance guy, like, hey, why don't you pick up the decathlon, the multi events, and so we can squeeze out a point or two? Because at that time in the Horizon League, there would rarely even be six competitors in the multi events, and the Horizon League scored 1 through 6. And so he was just thinking, like, let me put a body in there, essentially, like teach Matt how to throw a shot put, do a long jump, do a high jump, and he can get a point or two for us by participating, essentially. And so anyway, so we go to this Illinois meet, and I had not even met any of the athletes I was supposed to be working with until I was at the meet. And so I go to the meet, and Wimple comes up to me and he's like, "Yeah, so you're the jumps coach like we discussed, and Matt is going to be taking up the multi events, and I have him entered in pole vault today." And I'm like, "Oh, but you guys don't have any sort of like pole vault facilities whatsoever." He was like, "Yeah, so that's why he's entered, is so he can get some experience today." And I'm like, "What?" Like, so he hasn't really practiced it at all, and he's about to vault at this meet? Do you have a pole for him? No, we don't have a pole for him. And I'm like, "Oh, coach, yeah, you know what? Like at UIC, I didn't coach the pole vault. My buddy Joe Kapinski, he was the vault coach there. And so I just did like long triple high jump, sort of helped out with high jump." He was like, "Oh yeah, but you're a jumps guy. You can coach him in pole vault today." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And so my initial reaction is my stomach fell to the floor, and I started having these thoughts of like WGN News headline, uh, Loyola GA on his second day at the job gets athlete killed, because in a pole vault accident. And so I'm thinking like, A, how am I going to find some poles for him? B, how am I gonna get him to participate and compete in the pole vault? And C, I don't really know the pole vault all that well at that time. Just some very minor things I knew. And so I'm just like, my mind is racing, my heart is pumping, and I'm thinking like, how I don't know what to do here. How do I do this? And so I'm strategizing, I'm looking around, I'm thinking of what I can do. I'm kind of assessing the situation. Matt's an awesome guy. He'll do whatever you say, and he's kind of like he's all like excited that I'm gonna help him, and I'm kind of like, oh my god. And so I'm thinking, and I'm like, okay, the Illinois pole vault coach, I believe he was a volunteer. I think he actually works for Gill Athletics, and I'm thinking, okay, I see him. I recognize him. I think I had talked to him maybe in years past when I was coaching at UIC. I'm thinking he's running the pole vault. Maybe I can talk to him and see like, hey, can he help Matt out? And so basically, I had to kind of walk up to him with my tail between my legs and, eat a lot of humble pie. And I go up to him. I was like, "Hey man, I don't know if you remember me. I used to be at UIC." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, what's going on?" And I was like, "Look, got a situation here." And I explained to him I'm a GA, it's my second day on the job. They told me to coach this kid in the pole vault. I don't really know. I don't feel very comfortable coaching the event because the safety issue with it. He doesn't have a pole. Like, do you have a pole for him? Can you please help him in the pole vault so he doesn't kill himself? And so, the pole vault coach at Illinois, he just kind of like looks at me. He smile, he has a smirk on his face. He kind of starts laughing. He's like, "Yeah, man, I got it. I got it. I got it." And I'm just like, "Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." And so, I think opening height was maybe like 11 or 12 feet, right? And so he actually like created a whole new competition for Matt before the regular pole vault, and he put the opening height at like 6 feet for him. And then, and he just like gave Matt like the smallest pole possible, and he gave him like two tips. And then Matt goes and he clears 6 feet, and then Matt's all like pumped. He's like, "Wow, I have a PR in pole vault now." And then he puts it up to maybe 6'6", and then he comes through and clears 6'6", and now then all the other pole, like the actual pole vaulters, they're sitting around at first and they're kind of like, what the heck is going on here? And then Matt clears a second height, and then they're getting like amped up, because Matt's like, he's like pumped that he's clearing heights. And you got these like 17, 18-foot vaulters, they're getting all into it. And he puts that 7 feet, and Matt comes down and he clears 7 feet. And now he's got a crowd like excited. And then, I think he cleared 8 feet eventually. And then he missed out at maybe 9 feet. And but it was just like, it was a really kind of unique, fun experience. Just you know, that being sort of my first foray into Loyola track and field, in that whole situation. Whereas, I was so like full of fear and anxiety, trying to figure out what to do for this guy. And in the end, he had this amazing experience doing the pole vault, and the Illinois coach helping me out with it, and that was really cool. And then kind of fast forward into the rest of the meet, uh, which didn't go well at all. I mean, it was extremely poor meet for me as a coach, no doubt. But humble beginnings, right? And so then I coached Candace and Natalie in the long jump, and they both I know Candace took last place. I think she jumped maybe 14 something feet in the long jump, which for anyone that's aware of long jumping is, for a college female long jumper to jump 14 feet is probably not too good. And then Natalie jumped maybe a little further. I don't know, maybe 15-1, or I don't have the exact numbers on me, but I think we took last and like second to last in the long jump that day. And Candace is crying her eyes out because she jumped 17 in high school, and 17 and 36 in high school, and she was struggling, as many freshmen do. It's not uncommon to that freshmen struggle. But and then Natalie, she's pretty far off what she jumped in high school, and she's really upset. And then we go into triple jump, and I can't remember what, I think Natalie maybe jumped 33 feet or something, and she was a 38 footer, 37, 38 footer in high school. And then Candace didn't even make the pit. She couldn't make the pit from the 32-foot board. And so she's like sobbing her eyes out after long jump. She's sobbing her eyes out after triple jump. This is the first time I've met either of them. And so, and I'm like basically like consoling them. And like Candace is sobbing her eyes out on my shoulder. And I'm thinking to myself, like, the pole vault experience, Candace is crying her eyes out uncontrollably. Natalie is really upset. And I'm just like, man, what did I just get myself into? And so it was like, really, really humble beginnings of that first year. And we didn't really have a full-fledged jumps program or anything like that. And so, I go through that first semester in 2010, and it did get better. Like, it got better incrementally as we went. Um, but it wasn't very good overall. I mean, Natalie did get back to 38 feet by the end of outdoor, which is really encouraging. And Matt, he did end up scoring in the Horizon League outdoors, so he did squeak that point in. And then Candace did, like, she got back into the 16s for long jump, and she did get back into 36 feet for triple. So I wouldn't say it was like anything great by any means, but there was some improvement. But then at the end of the year, Wimple had talked to me, and he told me, he was like, "Hey, this is in May. I think it was maybe after the season had ended." He was like, "Yeah, Bob, I've been I've been holding back on telling you this because I wanted to see, how well how well you do with the team." And I got along with the team great. I love chatting with like the guy distance runners. I got along with them. So I'm so good, man. I love like cracking jokes with them, making fun out of them. And even like the women's sprints and distance run, like the whole team, I got along with really, really well. Like I love being around that team. And so Wimple is just, he basically gave me that first semester in 2010 as sort of a trial period to see how I'd mesh with the team, how I'd handle coaching Natalie, Candace, and Matt, and just how effective I'd be helping him out with some paperwork and things like that. And and I guess I did fine enough. I definitely didn't think I did that good, but I guess I did okay because in May he talked to me. And he was like, "Yeah, I think if you want to, I think we'd like to bring you back because I actually have I have a jumper coming next year, and I wanted to see if you'd be the guy to coach him eventually. And so this is really just like this is more like a tryout this semester to see if you'd be the guy to coach this incoming athlete next fall, so fall 2010." I was like, "Oh, really? Like, so who's this athlete you got coming in? He's like, well, we have this guy from Scotland, Great Britain. He's of Scottish descent, but grew up in Great Britain, and his name's James McLaughlin. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I mean, it must be pretty good if he's coming from across the globe. And he's like, yeah, yeah, he jumped 50 feet in the triple jump in high school. And I'm like, 50 feet? What? It's like, why didn't you tell me this before? And he was like, well, like I said, I didn't want to tell you about it and get your hopes up and then not bring you back the following year. I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, "No, but I feel like, this went pretty good. I like, the connection we have as fellow coaches, and, it seems like the team gets along with you pretty well." And so, and Natalie had improved pretty well, and Candace at least was heading in the right direction. And and so he was like, "Yeah, in the, so you're gonna end up being his coach next year. He's and he's a guy we envision being probably conference champion just about his entire career, and maybe even make a national meet someday." And so that kind of close up the story, this story here for this first question is, really humble beginnings, eating a lot of humble pie, that's for sure. And just I think it also reflects just the communal aspect of track and field coaching. And the Illinois coach helping me out with that was awesome. And something I'll never forget. Obviously, this is 11 years later. So, and I still remember that day very vividly. And so it was, very, very like subtle beginnings at Loyola that really blossomed into, where I am today, which, really, really proud of those, those athletes, and just kind of how far we came. So, yeah.
Big time players make big time plays. That's what I like to say. And all you need is an opportunity,
Yep.
which you said at the beginning of the story, and all just getting a foot in the door. And those who are cut out for it, those who should be there, like only time will tell. And I guess you didn't mess it up bad enough to get a second shot. So very cool story. And I can just imagine, like, oh my gosh, on that second day when he's like, yeah, you have to like teach him how to pole vault. And you're like, me?
I was like, wait,
Me?
you talking to me?
Yeah.
Oh. And then it was just like, heartbeat goes up by 100. My mind is racing, and I'm just thinking about like, how can I not get this kid killed? But hey, it worked out. So, and
It
and
did.
Matt, the cool thing with Matt is, he was such a good sport about it all. And I still talk to Matt to this day, and he's actually coaching high school out in Ohio. Yeah, he's probably gonna hate me for this too. I believe it's Solon High School out in Ohio, and he's actually done a really good job. I don't know if maybe he's moved on from that position since, but we actually have one of the kids he coached in high school on our team now. Yeah, one of our distance guys. He's done really well for us too, Chance. So it's kind of like a full circle
Yeah,
there.
small world.
Yeah.
So next story, what is the coolest story you have thus far of your career
Yeah.
amidst that crazy first one?
Yeah. So, man, this is a really hard to narrow it down. But I think what I'm gonna do is just kind of continue on that same time frame of early days at Loyola, and and eventually get into the story of our school record 4x1, and sort of like an unassuming hero of that 4x1. So I finished that first year. Wimple tells me about James McLaughlin. He's a 50-footer in high school. He eventually was took up long jump too, and jumped 24 in high school as well. So he was a monster recruit. And so I go through that that second year, third year. So we're going through 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, and I coached James through his whole career. And he was incredible. He ended up, long story short, he ended up he set the Scottish junior national record in the long jump, which still stands to this day at just over 25 feet. No, so he's still the Scottish, it's basically like the Scottish high school record holder, I guess you'd call it. Although it's not high school because he did it in a Loyola uniform, but the Scottish under 20 age group record. There's been a few guys that came really close to it, but he still holds it to this day. And he set all the Loyola records by a mile, and he set all the Horizon League records as well. So he's the Horizon League conference record holder in the jumps, indoor and outdoor, to this day still. And he ended up jumping 25 9.5 in the long jump, 52.2 in the triple. And so he was an All American, and so he had a magnificent career. And so anyways, kind of fast forwarding up through 11, 12, 13, 14, skipping over a lot of really amazing stories, one of which I'll come back to on the third question. But yeah, right around that kind of 2014 time, I'm finishing my grad assistantship, still like still kind of in between, like, okay, I'm finishing my master's in philosophy. Do I want to go the PhD route and try to go into teaching and research at, academic at some sort of university, or, follow that academic pursuit? Or do I want to try to go into coaching full time? And I was really, really torn on that, because I loved my time in the philosophy program at Loyola. I felt like I've really flourished. There was one professor that really took me under his wing, and really helped like develop me as like a thinker, if you will. And Dr. Pepperzak is his name, and he was just incredible, incredible influence and mentor to me in the philosophy department. And I really kind of I took all his classes, and he kind of like taught me how to like see things in a certain way, and that really helped me a lot. And he was helping me try to get a paper published. I was working on this paper on the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, and it was an interpretation of some of his passages. And I was, my point being is, like, I was really heavily thinking about the PhD route, the academic route, teaching route, research. But coaching was going well, like on the other side of it, James was doing what he was doing. Candace had really flourished, which I'm going to circle back to Candace on the third question. So I'll leave that aside for now. But my point is, it was going really, really well. We had another guy come in, Antoine, who was from my high school at Glenbard East, and he came in as a 23-foot guy, and he ended up jumping 25 feet for us. And so we had two 25-foot guys on our team in 2014, which I think there was only four other schools in the entire country that had two 20-foot or 25-foot long jumpers on their team. 25 feet is kind of hard number to get to. So it was going well, right? And so at that point, I was finishing my master's, and I had to decide what direction I wanted to go. And ultimately, I felt like, uh, I talked to my mom, and I talked to some friends and whatnot. I talked to Pat McGarry and some other friend. Gabe was a really good friend of mine, and some others, and they really were pushing me to stick with coaching. Like, look, man, you gotta, this is, I think I think your passion for this is really high. It's gone really well. Like, I think, I think this is the direction you should take your career path. And so, kind of summer of 2014, after that 2014 season, I decided, like, hey, I think I'm going to end my philosophy pursuits. I'm going to pursue the coaching route. And at the time, the head so we had also, I guess I skipped over this, but the staff that hired me, Rick Wimple, so they had been let go. And so he was out, and then a new staff came in, a new head coach, Randy Hassenbank, and a new set of assistant coaches, Jason Wakenight and Jackie Kropp, came in. And Randy, the head coach, he kept me on as a GA slash part-time coach. And so Randy had talked to me at the end of that 2014 season, and he was like, "Look, I'm gonna try to create a fourth full time position for you, and you can be the jumps coach. You can get more involved in recruiting. There's some other like details that I'll have you take over in terms of the program." And I was like, okay, here it is. Like Randy's going to create this position for me. I'll have full time. I'll have benefits, and this is here's my career path. It's set forth. And so I felt really content and excited about the future. And Randy seemed to feel pretty confident that it was going to happen, and he had entered all the paperwork in with HR and etc. And it was early summer in June, and I was at a wedding of a buddy of mine, and went to the wedding, beautiful ceremony, and then there was like a couple hour delay before like um the reception. At the wedding there was like a couple hours, and then the reception at night. And in between there, I was hanging out with my brothers and some friends in a hotel room, and Randy called me, and he was really kind of heartbroken, and he's like, "Hey Bob, I got some bad news for you. That full-time position that I was trying so hard to get for you, it's not going to happen." And so I'm like, at that point I was just like really despondent. I'm just like, man, I don't know where my future's heading at this point. Like I was still pretty content that I wanted to stick with coaching since I had made that decision, and just granted how it was going pretty solid for the first couple of years. And so I just didn't know, like, long term. I was like, okay, I guess I'll just stick it out at Loyola as the part-time coach this year, and just figure it out from there. But I wasn't really sure, and um so yeah, we went to the reception, had a fun time. It's actually where I met my girlfriend, who I'm still with to this day, Sammy. She's that was in 2014, and we're still together now, and she's a doctor down in Peoria now, doing really well. But yeah, so that summer goes on, and I just wasn't really sure about long term where my career was headed. Didn't have any full time prospects in line. And then towards the end of the summer, one of the assistant coaches, Jason Wakenight, he ended up accepting a job at Iowa, the University of Iowa, as the for like middle distance long sprints coach. And so he took that job, and he's still there now, and he's doing an awesome job there. I mean, yeah, the 400 group at Iowa has been superb for years now, and it's all due to him. And so he's done really well there. But anyways, in that summer of 2014, there was that opening with the position, and it had to be for sprints and hurdles, long sprints, short sprints, hurdles, and then and so these are all events I've never coached before. But Randy wanted to consider me for it, and I actually really wanted to coach sprints. I had been dying to coach sprints for a long time. Although I was coming from a jumps background, I think that gave me an advantage. So maybe people are gonna be upset that I say this, but I think your good jumps coaches are probably even better sprints coaches because coming from a jumps background, because I think they understand the technical components and a greater variety of training. And if you're going to coach great long and triple jumpers, you have to be a great sprints coach. Like you have to be really sound in your ability to make people faster as well. And so I was really excited to coach 100, 200, 400, dabble in the hurdles as well. Um, and so Randy interviewed some people, but ultimately, Pat McGarry was still with the team, and he did the same thing he did with Wimple, and he was pushing for me. And Randy ended up offering me that full time position, and so I accepted that position, and then I moved in 2014, fall of 2014, as the basically I coached the 100, the 200, the 400, the short hurdles, the long hurdles, 4x1, 4x4, and then I continued coaching long, triple, and high jump as well. So basically, I was coaching everything that wasn't distance for the most part. And I go through that first semester, and it was very very overwhelming because I was so used to coaching 4 or 5 athletes and giving very individualized attention. And so I still did that during that first semester, but it was different because I'm coaching 20 plus 25, 30 athletes or whatever, and more so coaching so many more events was the bigger issue. And And so, it was, but it went well that first semester. I think it took a lot of adjusting for me to get used to coaching all those events and juggling all those events and all the different personalities. But we had a really good group, and I was really excited about our 4x1 relay because we had Chris Stroop. He had run 10.5 as a freshman in the 100. And then but he had kind of regressed his sophomore year. And I think he was, I don't even know if he had ran faster than 10.8. Maybe he had a 10.7 in there. I can't remember, but he had a little bit of a sophomore slump in there. And then we had Jazz Hayes, he was 21 low guy, 20, I can't remember exactly what it was, but he was a stud, like really good 100, 200 guy. And we had Kevin Glassstetter, who was the conference champ in the 400. So he was really good. And then we had James. James was still on the team. That was going to be his final year in 2015, 2014, 15 was going to be his final year. And, James is pushing 26 feet in the long jump. He's 52 in the triple. And you're not slow if you're jumping that far, to say the least. And I had this other guy who I want to focus on for this story as the sort of unassuming hero. His name's Keegan Potts. And so Keegan walked onto the team many years ago and was coming back to the pole vault, and he did the pole vault. And so, we had set up a situation where he could pole vault with another school, so he could practice it. And in the Horizon League, once again, there was rarely even like 6 or 7 people competing in the pole vault at the conference meet at that time. It's since gotten a lot better. It's much better now than it was then. Um, but at that time, if you had a body, you had someone that could perform the pole vault, you could probably score a point or three. And so that's what Keegan did, and he kind of served that role when we were in the Horizon League conference. But in 2014, we switched from the Horizon League into the Missouri Valley Conference, which is very, very competitive. And the pole vault, that it was too good where, 13, 14 feet just wasn't going to cut it in the Missouri Valley. And I also didn't have that same practice situation that we had before for him. And so, and I felt like Keegan actually had some ability. I thought he could sprint fairly well if he really focused on it. I mean, at the time, I think he had only run 11.3, 11.4 in the 100, and then about 23. He almost certain he didn't break 23 in the 200. So definitely nothing all that great, but I felt like, he had some untapped potential there. And so I talked to him. I was like, "Hey man, like, I don't know if I don't know if pole vault's really going to work in the MVC the way it did in the Horizon League. And but how do you feel about being part of the short sprints group, and maybe being sort of a utility guy in the 4x1? Like, I feel like, I think you could probably be a pretty respectable sprinter. And, I think you'd add a lot of value to that group as a whole. And, who knows? I mean, you never know when your name's going to get called up. Like right now, you wouldn't be on the relay, but hey, you just got to be ready. And who knows, you never know what's going to happen at a conference championship meet. Crazy things happen, and I might have to call on you. And he just bought in right from the get-go. And so he immediately was part of the 100 200 meter group. And he bought in and did really well. And so, I had that group with Chris Stroop and Jazz Hayes, Kevin Glassstetter, Keegan was in there. We had a couple other guys, Sly and Josh, and then James was our jumper was part of that group as well. And so we, training went really well. We went through the indoor season. It went really, really well. Scored a ton of points at conference. James was named the Missouri Valley Conference most valuable athlete. He won the triple jump in 52.2. He second in the long jump. He was second in the 60 as well with a 679. And so he really he did great. Chris Stroop went second in the 200. He was in there for the 62. And so anyway, so indoor went really well, and we move on to outdoor. And we go through the regular season during outdoors, and it's going pretty well. Didn't caught a couple, didn't catch a few breaks with weather, but still hit some really good marks, and more so training was going well. Like if you looked at the results through much of our season, it would just be solid. But if you saw our practices on Mondays and Tuesdays, you'd be like, oh wow, like these guys are gonna run fast, you know? And so we go to Mount Sac Relays in California, and we're like, we want to set the school record, which I think was 40.7 or 40.8 at the time. And we felt like we could break that. And James at leadoff, and then Chris Stroop was second, Jazz Hayes third, and Kevin Glassstetter was the anchor. And we go through Mount Sac, and the handoffs weren't all that great, and but we still smashed the school record with a 40.53, and I think we are third overall at Mount Sac, which I mean at Mount Sac relays, that's no slouch. I want to say it was third, but anyways, so pretty good. You know, we're in the thick of making the regional meet. Um, I believe we were the that was the fastest time in the conference at the moment. And so, you know, we're feeling really good about it. We just need to clean up the handoffs, and, you know, we could certainly run quite a lot faster. And so, we learned from it, still pretty excited about it. James moves on to the long jump at Mount Sac, and he jumps 25.6. And he's leading Mount Sac, you know, huge jump, one of the top jumps in the country at the moment, right? And I'll always regret this. I should have shut him down at that point. Like I should have said, like, hey, we got 25.6, you got a 25.6 jump in, like we're good. Like, but he really I we also were chasing that magical 26-foot mark. And so he wanted to keep going, and I didn't stop him. But then he ended up pulling his hamstring on, I think it was the next attempt, or the maybe two attempts later. And unfortunately that was the end of his college career at that point. And so it was a real bummer. And the guys are pretty heartbroken about it, because we're a real tight knit group. And James was, he was on pace to be all American for sure. And then, our chances in the 4x1 took a massive hit, because it was pretty close between Stroop and James as our fastest guys. And that was really hard, and the guys are really down about it. We're ending the Mount Sac relays, and the spirits are really down, and we just accomplished all these great things, but an injury like that is pretty tough to swallow. And so, you know, after like at Mount Sac, maybe an hour or two later, I was like, as a coach, you gotta kind of suck it up, right? And you gotta get the guys head in the right direction. We gotta move forward. We'll be there for James, but at the same time, we gotta think about what's ahead, and the conference meets only a few weeks ahead. And we can still win. We can still win the conference title. We can still win it. And so I go up to Keegan, our old guy Keegan. I'm like, hey, Keegs, remember that talk we had in September? You're up, buddy. And he was like, oh, and he was like, oh, yeah, okay, coach, okay. And Stroop and Jazz and Glassstetter, they're kind of like, well, I guess we'll roll with Keegan. I think he can do okay. And they're thinking like, oh, maybe I'd change the order a bit, uh, and maybe put Keegan on third or something like that. I was like, we are not changing the order. I'm just going to put Keegan on leadoff, and we're keeping everything the same. And because I trust Keegan on leadoff, that's how much faith I have in this guy. And I told him at Mount Sac that day, I was like, you need to be ready. Like we'll run it at Drake relays, just to kind of get a rep in. We're gonna practice it, and I trust you to lead off my relay. And I think you can, and I know you can do well. I'm confident you're gonna do okay. And so that's what we did. And Keegan was improving dramatically. I mean, he got down to 11:04 in the 100, like really respectable. And then his 200 improved way more. I mean, he was down to 22:10, I think, in the 200, for a guy that hadn't broken 23 before this year. And so I was really confident. and we work a lot of curve running in the program, so I think like he had really mastered that piece quite well. And so he was doing well, and we ran it at Drake, but didn't run all that good. It was also like 38 degrees and raining, so nobody really ran that good. But I think we ran like 41.3 or something. I don't know what it was, but it's nothing special. Um, but anyway, so we go into the conference meet. It's and I'm dead set on Keegan leading off. Friday is the 200 prelims, and that went extremely well. Stroop and Jazz and Glassletter all get through to the 200 finals. So we had 3 of the 8 finalists. And so I was pumped about that. And then Saturday, Kevin got through in the 400 and Chris got through in the 100 prelims. And so Sunday it was setting up to be this like epic day of the final day of the MVC championships in 2015 down at Illinois State. And, first event is the 4x1, and I'm shaking in my boots, but I'm trying not to show it. And Keegan's in the lead off, and I'm just thinking, here's Keegan Potts, a converted pole vaulter, walk on, right? This kid, and I didn't mention this. So another reason me and Keegan got along so well is he was actually a philosophy major, and he was actually named the Loyola undergrad philosophy student of the year that year. And so this kid's a brainiac, and so we would have some really nerdy conversations quite often. And I'm just thinking like, man, uh, I'm thinking back to that conversation I had with him in September about being like a utility guy for the 4x1. And uh and lo and behold, here we are in mid May at the conference meet, and Keegan Potts is lining up in the blocks in the MVC 4x1 final. And gun goes off, and Keegan runs the leg of his life. He probably gained ground on just about everyone, and he hands off to Chris Stroop, and Chris absolutely blows the field away. And at that point, the only thing that's gonna there's only two things stopping us from winning, and it's we drop the baton would be one, uh or two, the anchor for Northern Iowa was Brandon Carnes, who was just an absolute mega stud. I mean, that guy actually ended up running 997 in our conference, yeah, in the Missouri Valley Conference. So I was very scared of Brandon Carnes for good reason. And so anyway, so the gun goes off, and Keegan runs the leg of his life. He hands off to Chris, and Chris just extends the lead. And now we had a lot of issues with Chris handing off the Jazz. And so Jazz had a tendency to leave too early. Um, and so what I did be and maybe Jazz will probably I don't think I ever told him I did this. So if he ever listens to this, he's probably gonna slap me for it. But so so as we're putting, for the 4x1, you put your tape marks down, right, and everything. And so this is 10, 15 minutes before the race. Jazz goes, and he steps off his marks, which I think were maybe like 26, 28 or something like that. And I waited for him to do like a warm up, like an excel. I waited for him to put his marks down, and I waited for him to go do an acceleration so he wouldn't see me. And I actually went and I moved his mark. I moved his mark up 3 feet, because I was just so afraid that he was going to leave too early. And so he was really at, I think, 23, 25, or the Marcus was at 23, 25. And I didn't want to tell him I was going to do that, because I feel like that would freak him out if I told him like, hey, move up, right before the race. Right. And so I actually just went and did it myself when he wasn't looking. And so, back to the race, Keegan runs the leg of his life, hands off to Stroop, perfect. Stroop is extending the lead. Sure enough, Jazz leaves early, and I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, and I mean, it was like a half a meter before the end of the exchange zone, they got it. And so Jazz gets the baton, and he's extending the lead a little more. And then it's just a matter of, can Kevin Glassstetter hold off Brandon Carnes with a pretty good lead. I mean, we probably had 10 or 12 meters on the field at that point. And sure enough, I mean, Carnes was closing, but he was able to hold him off, and we ended up with the MVC title, and we actually re-broke our school record and ran 40.50. And so with Keegan Potts, the unassuming hero, as the leadoff leg, was pretty cool and special, and I thought that was a really fun moment. And those, and another thing is, it was pretty cool, just kind of wrap up this story, is those guys right now, they're all doing really well. Like Keegan, I was just talking to Keegan like 3 days ago. We were texting, and he is graduating from Michigan's law school this week. And if anyone's familiar with law schools, Michigan, I think it's top 5 in the entire country. And so, this guy is really doing well for himself. And Chris Stroop, he's actually with I actually still coach Chris to this day, and he's taken up skeleton. And so he's with Team USA bobsled skeleton. And then Jazz, he just accepted a job out in San Francisco just a few weeks ago, and so he's in the process of moving out there. He's doing extremely well. And Kevin's got a young son, and he's raising out in like kind of the Rockford, Illinois area. So it's really kind of fun story. Just that whole first year as a full time coach and juggling everything, and you never know like who the hero is going to be. It could be the person you least expect.
Big time players make big time plays. That theme comes back for sure. And it's crazy how simple, like, and that just speaks to Keegan, like having that conversation of, hey, we're gonna switch, but then also him just being all in,
Yeah.
and it's funny how he's probably taken that lesson and just him being that kind of guy to law school, and how it is about the X's and O's, but then it's also not, kind of like I said before. But so very cool story. Kind of you'll have to send this episode to Jazz
Yeah, I
and have
will.
him
I
skip
will.
forward to this point in time. But I think we're a little bit over an hour, so we'll
Yeah.
we'll wrap
Sure.
up briefly. So last big question, the story you're most proud of this far. So kind of the biggest full circle moment in your
Yeah.
career.
Yeah. I'll keep this one a bit shorter with the time frame, but yeah, kind of going back to Candace. I think when you say full circle or biggest payoff, I just think about like where Candace started and where she ended, because it's kind of wild and crazy, and I think it speaks to her like work ethic and determination. And that first meet I was at, in a Loyola hoodie at Illinois, that I had mentioned in the first story. She's jumping 14 feet. She's sobbing her eyes out. She couldn't even make the sand pit from the 32-foot board and triple jump. I mean, that's about as bad as it gets, right? For a college jumper. And and by the end of that first year, she had made some minor improvements and done okay. And I got to know her really well, and I felt like we were figuring things out. And then into her sophomore year, she was definitely improving some. She was hitting 17 feet pretty consistently, and ended up jumping, I think, 17.6 that year. And then by the end of the year, I told her like at the end of her sophomore year, we had a meeting after the season was over, and I told her like, this is the point. Like, freshman sophomore year is typically a lot of learning experience. You probably deal with a lot of adversity. You fall on your face a lot. And then, it's really junior, senior year. It's like, this is the time. It's now or never, And so, and I told her, like, look, I believe you could be a conference champion in the long jump. And she had never even made a conference final at this point, right? It's not even really close to it. She's jumping 17. 17 is respectable, but you're talking about being a conference champion, you got to be pushing 20 feet. And I told her, like, I believe you can do this, but it's a matter of like how far are you willing to go, how determined are you going to be. And so we had a long talk about that, and like changes we had to make with all kinds of stuff. And she bought in, and she used that summer to get herself in crazy good shape. And by the time that junior year came around, she came in ready, and she was determined to contend for a conference title. And at that time, there was a very dominant jumper from Wisconsin, Milwaukee, who had, I mean, she won everything, and no one really could touch her. But I felt like Candace could compete with her. Like I really felt like if all things went well and she trained all year at a very high level, the girl that was, couldn't make the pit and triple jump and jumping 14 feet and sobbing her eyes out at that first meet with me, I felt like she could really do it. Like I felt like she could contend for that win, maybe even jump 20 feet someday. And I was very confident in that. And so, we go through that junior year, and that's we talked about it all the time about like all the details we had to manage to get to a conference championship level, and eventually maybe regional qualifying, national qualifying. And that just like really nourished training every day, having that kind of determination and attention to detail and whatnot. And so we go through that junior year, and she had clearly, training was going well. The season was going pretty well. She was hitting 18s, which she had never done before. And we go into the indoor conference meet, and she finishes runner up, and kind of a distant runner up, but she finishes second overall. And for someone that never made a conference final, that was, pretty good step forward. But we didn't really celebrate it because the goal was to win, right? We wanted to win. And we knew we still had a lot of room to gain if we were gonna catch the Milwaukee jumper, who was really a super talented jumper. And they were developing a nice rivalry. And it was nice to like have someone to chase like that, because I feel like that can really push you too. And so we go through the outdoor season, and Candace continues progressing. And we go to this local meet at University of Chicago, the Chicagoland Championships, and I take her there, and I felt like she was just really on the cusp of a big jump, just the way training was going. And she ended up jumping 1911 that day, and she had never even her furthest jump at that point was 18.7. And so it was just like explosion, to like regional qualifying, top of the conference. And we go to the conference meet that year, at, I think it was Wisconsin Lutheran, it was held at, and it was very cold, kind of wet conditions. And you get in the conference final, and it was cool because at the end of, I believe that's the second day of the championships, the women's long jump ran late, and so everything was done for the day, and everyone, all the teams, all the athletes, all the coaches lined up the long jump runway to watch the women's long jump final. And so the atmosphere was just electric. And it was so cool because like here we are, we had talked about this at the end of sophomore year, that you can contend for a conference title. We worked all this time through the entire calendar year to get to this point where we are in a conference final. We're right in the thick of it, ready to contend. And then you had the setting where you probably got 100 people lining up the long jump runway. And I was just thinking, man, like this is what you work for, like this is what we talked about. This is all we talked about, is getting to this point. And it ended up being this epic battle where I think the lead switched like four times. I mean, it was perfect, and eventually Candace did end up winning by, I think it was by 2 centimeters or something. So she barely got that conference title, and she won her first Horizon League long jump title of her career. And it was a really great moment, just kind of seeing that whole thing through. And then even after that point, I think like that was such a threshold for her to break, because then she made the regional meet that year and got some good experience. And then the next year was her senior year, and she just never looked back. I mean, she actually ended up setting the Horizon League records. So she set the conference record in the indoor long jump, which still stands to this day at 1910 and a half. And then she actually set the conference record in the outdoor long jump that year too, at 20 feet, 3 3/4, which still stands to this day, which I think I'd have to check the results from yesterday's Horizon League to see if it got broken, but hopefully not. But yeah, I know it's just so yeah, kind of going through that story a little quickly, but it was just kind of cool. For me, I always think about that first meet that was such a disaster, you would never would have thought that the girl that literally took last place and was sobbing her eyes out because she didn't think she belonged in college track, because that's what she was saying, that at that first meet her freshman year, and then you fast forward to the end of her senior year, and she's a conference record holder, and I always thought that was just such a, a rags to riches story that I'll never forget, and I still talk to her a lot this day of just about, about that whole process and, and how fun it was for the both of us.
And at the beginning of that story that set up everything else was little Bob on day number 2 at that meet down at University of Illinois, and imagine it's so crazy to think back on those stories, like, it was just simply, like, your decision to be encouraging or,
Yeah.
"I don't know what to
Yeah.
say, but I'm just gonna be nice,"
Yeah.
and, like,
Yeah.
and the impact that that can lead to, and that it did lead to,
Yeah.
that's kind of the first thing that hit me was like, imagine if it was kinda like, do I hug her? Nah, that's weird. Like, I'll just give her a
Yeah.
pat on the back and just, "You got this, it'll be fine," and, and then she ends up hating track and she quits, and
Right, yeah,
there's all these stories not only for you, but also for her that she wouldn't have
yeah.
had, so it's just so crazy how some of that stuff can play out. It takes a lot of time, but very cool story, yeah. So last question, if
Yep.
you and this is good, you being a philosophy guy, I'm excited to hear your answer.
Yeah.
So here on TSP, I love the theoretical and the stories, and the X's and O's are important, but that's why we're here. But that's not what it's all about when we share these stories and stuff. But we all have to be better at our jobs. That's why we consume content like this. So if you had to give the listener one question that they can ask themselves on a daily basis or weekly basis to help themselves get better, what would that question be?
Ooh, yeah, yeah, when I saw this, I was like, "Oh, man, this is tough here. This is a tough question." And so, I'm gonna I think what I'm gonna say, maybe it sounds a little, like, esoteric, but I think the question that I constantly ask myself, and maybe people will like this, maybe people will hate it. I'm just saying this is just kinda how I think, is you have to learn what questions to ask. And so, to me, I think and I'll elaborate on that in the sense that I think for good reason, a lot of coaches do a lot of copy and pasting. I copy a lot of programs myself, like in terms of writing training and whatnot. We all go through coaching education, we read books, right? We talk to each other like you and I have, and we glean ideas off of each other. Um, but sometimes we get very caught up in the X's and O's, in the sense that it has to fit a certain framework, or because we've done things a certain way always, or because I read this in a book, I'm going to implement it. And those are all good and fine. But sometimes you just have to ask yourself, like, uh, you know, what are the questions I need to ask to get athletes to where I need them to be? And so, like, what I'll use as an example is those 2 Simply Faster articles that I wrote. That was really, I mean, yeah, obviously I had a lot of influence in terms of coaching ed and books I've read and things like that, but ultimately my thinking and everything I wrote in there was really just my process of trying to figure out how to get Eric, who's one of our long jumpers, to jump 26 feet. And so it wasn't anything I necessarily read in a book. It was just more like I thought about, okay, I've worked with this kid, Eric. I've worked with this girl, Mackenzie, for years now. And what are some possibilities I can entertain in terms of helping them to reach that next level of performance? And so, I wrote those 2 articles, and largely on on uses of the 1080 sprint. Because I wasn't necessarily advocating for those methods. I wasn't trying to say, hey, this is how you should do assisted sprint training, or this is how you should do resisted sprint training. This is more just me thinking out loud. Like, I was just thinking, like, here is I asked myself the question, how can I take this individual athlete, Eric Burns, who, I can't go over all the details of his career and the things that went well and didn't, but how can I take this athlete and what are the pieces that he is missing to hit 26 feet. And so I felt like, the stuff that I did with the assistant sprint training, that was just like me answering that question for myself, if that makes sense. It wasn't like I read this in a book. It wasn't like I got this from coaching ed or something like that. It was more just like I was asking myself the question of how can I get this kid a little faster? How can I bring that speed into the approach? How do I handle more speed on the takeoff? And how do you balance all these things? And so that's what I mean by learn to ask the right questions. Is a lot of the programming I developed with him and still do with other athletes to this day is asking myself the question of how can I get this athlete to perform at a certain level and what are the things I'm missing? And so I think it starts to for me it sparks a lot of creativity when I ask more questions of myself. And so, because I think we get caught up a lot in like reading and memorizing and note taking and copying and following a strict program. Like I do. I've used a lot of the USTF CCCA coaching ed curriculum, which is great, and I still use to this day. Or there's a lot of feed the cats for example, right? People follow that methodology, and there's many other Clyde Hart method, and there's all these other methods, and they're all fine, but at the end of the day, like you have to ask yourself with the individual athletes you're working with, you have to ask yourself the questions of those athletes. How can I get them to improve? And so I think that's really the key. Maybe it's not crystal clear, but I think that whole idea of asking yourself those questions and engaging in the process of trying to figure it out on your own and ask other coaches too, like bring them in on your process and they can probably help you clarify things. And then from that question asking and that attempt to answer your questions, you'll build a training program and you almost build like a greater level of consciousness and awareness of what you're doing and how you're progressing training and the connections you're making with an athlete and with training as a whole. So I think yeah, I guess I'd say, learn to ask more questions, figure out what the right questions are to ask of yourself with the athletes you work with.
Yeah, am I asking the right questions, and how can I ask better ones? If you want
Yeah.
better
Yep.
answers, you need better questions. Very simple.
Yeah.
So very cool. So I'm now going to open up the floor to you to shamelessly plug whatever you got to plug. Where can the listeners get more of you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I had the two articles out on Simply Faster. There's a couple other podcasts out there with Colin Burke, the Track and Field Performance podcast, and then Mike Cunningham's Skill Athletics Connections podcast for the two people that would like to listen to me talk more. Probably just my mom and my girlfriend are the only ones that'll listen, um, but yeah, I'm easy to find on Twitter, Bob Thurnhoffer, and then Instagram as well. And still working on a couple more Simply Faster articles. I had to kind of put it aside with the season going on, but I'm gonna get back to it over the summer. So but yeah, I'm pretty easy to find on social media. If anyone has any questions or just wants to connect, I always love talking track and especially with all that's going on in the world these days, always nice to connect with coaches and talk to them some more. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time and sharing your stories. And I'm looking forward